Well, there's a lot going on, obviously. In Gaza, the most urgent development is that Israel has launched a new, wider campaign
Oh,
to clear out the northern part of the Gaza Strip. They've ordered all the surviving inhabitants and those who have returned to leave, and essentially are setting up a free fire zone in the northern part of Gaza. And there's speculation in Israel and outside that this is meant to be a permanent clearing of the population of northern Gaza and a reoccupation of that part of the Gaza Strip, potentially, as the right wing in Israel is talking about, recolonizing part of it with Israeli settlers. So we don't know the details or certainly what Israel is intending, but it could be another really dire step that they are getting ready to, inflict on Gaza. And by the way, in terms of what has happened so far, there was a very important article in the Times, an opinion piece by the doctors who have been speaking out, have gone to Gaza, uh, who report about Israeli atrocities. It's worth looking at if you have access to the Times. Um, Meanwhile, everyone is waiting to see what Israel is going to do in terms of attacking Iran. It hasn't happened yet, but people are expecting something momentarily. Uh, there's been back and forth over the nature of Israel's attack. The U.S. saying that they are quietly urging Israel not to attack Iran's nuclear facilities or the oil facilities because that would be an escalation on the one hand, and on the other, they cannot. Israel alone cannot destroy Iran's civilian nuclear infrastructure without U.S. participation, and of course, uh, Iran and its most vocal proponents are urging that the U.S. participate in an Israeli attack on Iran.
Iran?
Yeah, so we don't know what's going to happen. And of course, if Israel does attack Iran in a large, way, the Iranians say they're going to retaliate, and we could have a sort of spiraling escalation that would likely bring the U.S. directly into conflict. The most of the attention lately has been on Israel's attack on Lebanon. It has launched limited ground attacks into the southern part of Lebanon and increased its bombing campaign there and against Beirut as well. And in retaliation, for the first time, Hezbollah, which has continued to demonstrate that it has the capability of striking back, has launched missile attacks against Haifa and Safed. The first time in this war, they have targeted civilian areas as opposed to military facilities. And Israel has had some casualties in both places. Um, Netanyahu made a speech the other day in English urging regime change in Lebanon, and the U.S. is now on record supporting Israel's incursion into Lebanon, and reports are that it is also advocating regime change in Lebanon. The problem is that Lebanon has no regime to change at the moment. It has not had elections since 2018. It has no legal governing structure. And it there's no we could go in if there are questions. Lebanon has a very peculiar electoral system based on purported sectarian population, and as of the last election, Hezbollah, which is both a political party, a social movement, as well as an armed force, is the largest single electoral force in Lebanon, together with Amal, its other Shia party ally in parliament. It is the largest vote, though not a majority, in parliament. So what they're really talking about and what Netanyahu was proposing was a renewed civil war in Lebanon, with Israel supporting the anti-Hezbollah side and threatening, as he did in that speech, that the alternative to a new, more Israel-friendly regime is to turn Lebanon into Gaza, with all that suggests. So that's the situation we're in. There are a lot of reports. It's unclear what the U.S. is doing, but it's also important to remember, we're all very familiar with the influence of AIPAC and other Israel lobbying groups in the United States, is that the U.S. has its own imperial presence and imperial interests in the Middle East that have a long history and are independent of Israel lobbying. The U.S. Attacked Lebanon in 1958 and sent troops there in 1983, and has interfered in Lebanon consistently all along for decades. So yeah, the Israel lobby is important, but the U.S. empire has its own interest in the Middle East that, for the most part, coincide with Israel's, and how that's going to play out, we don't know. And of course, long before Israel came into existence, U.S. had a strategic ally in Saudi Arabia, and has an important interest in controlling the oil production in the Middle East. Although, again, as a reminder, we don't need Middle Eastern oil. The U.S. is self-sufficient in oil, but controlling and profiting from that oil is immensely important in strategic terms. So that's the situation we have today, and I'm glad to answer any questions that people have.
Any reaction from Washington to all this?
Well, there are all kinds of reports, that the U.S. Is effectively giving the green light to Israel now in Lebanon, and that was stated by the State Department spokesperson the other day. By the way, there are also reports that a week or two ago, Hezbollah was willing to negotiate a temporary ceasefire on the northern border with Israel. And a couple of days later, of course, he was assassinated by Israel, similar to what happened with Hamas, that as they were negotiating, Israel killed their chief negotiator. So Israel, again, does not want a ceasefire and is doing everything it can to intensify and widen the war in the Middle East. And the U.S. is either overtly supporting that or somehow shrugging and saying, well, nothing we can do to stop it, other than supply Israel with the weapons and military force that they need to carry it out. The Watson Institute in Brown University published a really important survey of U.S. military aid to Israel in the short and the longer run. And the summary is that we've spent $22 billion plus on supporting Israel's war effort in the last year alone, and that's on top of the hundreds of billions we've given Israel in military aid over the years. So the U.S. is not helpless, as sometimes said. We are a party to this war. And by the way, that military aid to Israel included 14,000 one-ton bunker-busting bombs that Israel used in Gaza and in Beirut.
There's some hands, which is great. Just on the format, I've been posting these political military reports by Jeff on YouTube is another way to get our message out, but I don't want to put a gallery of the whole people in the meeting so that people can remain confidential if they wish. So I'm going to, as an experiment on the format, I'm going to try to call on people now, but not put their faces up. So let's see how that works. Abby?
First of all, there's a doctor in the northern Gaza who has said that they will not leave, even though they've been threatened. They're not leaving the hospital. They're not leaving their patients, which is amazing. Number two is, I forgot. And number three is, do we, do we know, Susan Nicholson, do we have any idea what's happening with the ICC and ICJ? And weren't there some other countries who are going to join on like the ICC ruling? Do we know?
I think we're still waiting on the ICC ruling. It's still being reviewed by this panel of jurists as to whether or not there's jurisdiction. Lots of countries supported the jurisdiction issue, saying yes, the ICC does have jurisdiction over this issue, but there were some who didn't. My understanding is that it's still being reviewed, although I think the latest ruling, the advisory ruling by the ICJ in July, that Israel had no business anywhere in the occupied territories, that its presence was unlawful, and that it had to remove itself entirely as soon as possible, will certainly help the ICJ or the ICC, I think, in issuing the arrest warrants. I still have some confidence that they will be forthcoming. But other than that, I don't have any more recent information.
Thank you, Cole. I remembered number 2, which was that I'm seeing more posts connecting the fact that the U.S. doesn't have money, for example, to support people behind the hurricanes and the one that's battling, right, that's coming right now, because that money we spent, as Jeff said, 22 billion, I believe, to Israel. So I think more people are making the connection now, which is great.
If I could add, relative to the weather, it's ironic how sometimes events far away from the Middle East have an impact. The headquarters of the U.S. Central Command, which is the military command that covers the Middle East, is in Tampa, Florida. Their largest logistics base relative to the Middle East is an airfield in Tampa, which has now been evacuated.
Oh my God.
So this new hurricane may
They probably won't be
actually
hitting
affect
around
U.S.
tonight.
operations in the Middle East now.
Yeah.
In reference to Jeff's first point about the clearing of Gaza, I received a TikTok video from England which showed what looked like Israelis and boats approaching Gaza and saying, "This is our land, we're going to take it." I didn't give much credence to it because it is TikTok, but it is a very damning, strange video, and I don't know if I can figure out a way to send it. I'd be happy to send it.
So Israel, some people in Israel have organized boat tours along the coast of Gaza for people to observe the destruction develop directly, and that's what I think you're referring to. It's it's kind of a tourist effort to watch and cheer on the destruction in Gaza, as do Israelis from on the land side, from inside Gaza. You've seen pictures of them gathering on hilltops to overlook the destruction in Gaza. So, a lot of Israelis think it's great what's happening in Gaza and want more of it.
Can we just say that the folks on the boat were extreme rightists, very observant Israelis, Jewish observant. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think Abby had a webinar in the spring with some people that were talking in detail about these debates in Israel, these struggles. Mary Ellen.
Yeah, so I have to admit that I still am having trouble wrapping my brain around what's happening, because this escalation, especially with regard to Iran, we are risking, a hit to the global economy that could, make the Depression look like a tea party. And I just don't understand what they call the national interest, what the business interests would have to gain, or rather why there isn't sufficient pushback to what's going on. And yet it just seems, I'm actually convinced that this is really what the US wants. It's what the administration wants. They're happy to, they'll wring their hands in front of the cameras, but other than that, this is what the US is doing. and they're just using Israel as their pit bull. But I'm just really still struggling to understand this.
Kamala
Makes no
Harris
sense.
was on 60 Minutes last Sunday, and when asked about it, said that Iran is the #1 U.S. enemy in the world.
Yeah, right.
And of course, the absurdity of that Iran somehow threatens the United States is just insane.
Sure.
And especially given the reality that the U.S. has supported Iraq when it invaded Iran, killed hundreds of thousands of people. We shot down an Iranian civilian airliner and killed almost 300 civilians during the 1980s. And the idea that Iran is threatening the United States rather than the other way around is just crazy. And only the lunatics that run our political system can possibly believe that.
And with the other wars on the other fronts as well. I mean, whatever happened to China? Anyhow, I'm done.
Right. Iran is enemy #1 now, even more than Russia or China, for whatever that's worth.